Hi there, and welcome to this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent T. Today we've got an interesting episode. It's a group chat, and we're going to talk about the assassination of President Kennedy. This was all sparked by my recent 30-second visit to Dealey Plaza. I was coming from the convention center to the airport in Dallas after the NRA convention, and suddenly realized I was right where it happened. So I'd never really done much study of the JFK assassination, but after that, it got me hooked. So I was talking to American Handgunner editor Tom McHale and AmericanCop.com editor Erick Gelhaus. They've both been there. They're both experienced shooters, and Erick and I are experienced law enforcement officers. So I thought, let's talk about it and see if we come up with any conclusions, or can at least maybe set the record a little straighter than what it is, because it's been called the mother of all conspiracies, and a majority of Americans think there was some kind of conspiracy. So maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. We don't talk about that so much, but we will talk about the shooting part of it. So, and as far as our title goes, you know, Diddy didn't do it. Well, we had to pick a celebrity and figured nobody's going to really come to Diddy's defense, but that's basically my point, that just about anybody could have made the shot with a modicum of training. So anyway, I'm ready to talk to Erick Gelhaus and Tom McHale as we talk about the JFK assassination right now. Well, hello, gentlemen, and welcome to what I think is the first three-way interview on the Guns Magazine podcast.
It's entirely possible.
Yeah. Well, let me explain the episode right out of the gate here. First of all, the title, Diddy Didn't Do It, and that was courtesy of Tom McHale. We were talking about this. The genesis of this episode was I was in Dallas last week, or actually this week, I guess it was, and we're cruising along going to the airport, and I said, this looks familiar, and the person I was with said, yeah, that's the book depository. And the guy driving the cab's like, yeah, this is, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, and I've never really looked up, read about, understood the JFK assassination, a major moment in American history, but it just wasn't something I was interested in. But spending the 15 to 20 seconds I spent in Dealey Plaza driving down Elm Street over the spot where John F. Kennedy was murdered, it really shocked me. So I came home. I got home late that night, immediately got on the internet and started doing a deep dive. And when I talked to Erick and Tom about this, they both are, I think both have been there and actually more versed in the
whole ground.
Yeah, the whole thing than I am. So basically, the title came from my supposition that after I've been there and I've seen it, and now that I've done research, anybody with any modicum of basic rifle training could have made that shot. Now, am I saying there's no conspiracy and it wasn't Lee Harvey? I don't know. But there's a lot in the public record that can be explained. And one thing that I will tell you in doing my deep dive and explanation, all the people offering opinions, very few of them are experienced shooters or law enforcement officers. Well, hey, we've got both here today, and that's why I invited these guys. So we're pretty sure Puffy, what was his former name? Puffy Daddy Combs or whatever. Didn't do it. P. Diddy. Yeah. Now, okay, and as an aside, this is kind of inside baseball. When I said we're going to do this episode, I wanted to title it Taylor Swift Didn't Kill JFK. And our producer, Ashley, said that would go bad for us. So nobody's going to defend Diddy at this point. So that's why Diddy didn't do it. And Tom liked that alliteration title. But anyway,
I like the original a lot, but yeah. I'm very afraid of the legions of Swifties.
Of Swifties. So, but regardless, the point is, I think about anybody could have made that shot. And since you guys have been there, and like I said, you're experienced shooters, you're experienced law enforcement officers, let's get your take instead of various and sundry conspiracy theorists and book authors that come up with some new thing. So, anything to add to that, guys, before I get into what actually happened on November 22nd?
I have something to add, and I'm thinking back. It must have been probably on a Saturday that I went, maybe a Friday, like a weekend day, because when I went there, we went on foot to do the tour and see everything. And it was busy and packed with pedestrian traffic. And there were maybe 6, I would call them booths, but it's all outdoors, obviously. But people fully set up with materials, paperwork, books, photos, poster boards, and they were all proving various conspiracies, and they were, we're talking dedicate your life to researching and proving this conspiracy stuff. And, all of them had little different viewpoints and different storylines, but I was kind of amazed. There was a whole industry behind this topic there.
Well, I think Wikipedia called it the mother of all conspiracy theories. And after you start doing the deep dive, I get it. So I'm not saying we're proving anything or we're even covering new ground here. But again, I think we've got a different area of expertise here. And we're going to run through some of this and focus a lot on the shooting and the gun rather than the whole who did it, the Martians and the mafia and Che Guevara and all those things. So, okay. November 22nd, 1963. I was 11 months old. At 12:30 Central Time, the limo carrying John F. Kennedy, his wife Jackie, and Texas Governor John Connally, his wife, and then driver and bodyguard, they pulled on to Elm Street, which is in Dealey Plaza. And like I said, it's pretty much the way it was, and that's what shocked me. I pictured there's some kind of park, memorial, or whatever. It's about exactly what it is. And about the time I said book depository, that's about probably where the first shot was fired. And by the time I realized where I really was, it was probably about where President Kennedy had taken the fatal bullet. So anyway, they're in a motorcade. They're touring Dallas. If you believe the government, Lee Harvey Oswald was on the 6th floor of the Texas Book Depository. He fired one shot. He fired a second shot, which hit President Kennedy in the throat. And then he fired a third shot, which struck Kennedy in the head. Now, based on a lot of different interviews and all this, they figured out the total firing time was under 6 seconds. So about 2 seconds per shot from start to finish. After President Kennedy was hit, he was taken to Parkland Hospital about 4 miles away. And 17 minutes later, after he arrived, about 1 p.m., he was declared deceased. So looking at the basics of this, the distance was, and this is what really surprised me after being there, the distance was only 56 to 88 yards on a limo that was essentially moving roughly away from the shooter at 7 to 11 miles per hour. So that was the genesis of this whole thing. Is after I've been there and seen it, it's not that tough of a shot. That's one of the things that a lot of conspiracy people hang their hat on. Oh, it's a lot of shots in a short period of time and in the long distance. Not really, especially if you've had training. So the rifle in question was a 6.5 by 52 millimeter Italian Carcano M91/38 bolt action rifle with a 6-round internal mag fed from in-block clips. Oswald's gun was built in 1940 at the Royal Arms Factory in Terni, Italy. Basically, the 6.5 by 52 was the Italian's main battle rifle from about 1891 through 1970, though I can't find any issue uses after World War II. So probably home guard and ceremonial and all that. Oswald, and we can thank him for this part of the 1968 Gun Control Act, Lee Harvey ordered that gun mail order, and they shipped it straight to his house. He used the alias A. Hidell. He bought it. He actually ordered a Model 38 infantry carbine from an ad in the back of American Rifleman magazine from Klein's Sporting Goods. He'd ordered the 17.7-inch carbine, but received the 20.9-inch infantry version. And the gun had a brand new Ordnance Optics 4x18 optic that was mounted when it got there. So based on tests by the Warren Commission investigating the shooting and some other folks, the gun will hold about a 3 to 5 inch group at 100. And as our own Will Dabbs described it, it's a craptastic rifle. So not super accurate, but I guess accurate enough. The Zero was found to be 2.5 inches high and 1 inch right. And that gun is still in the National Archives. The 6.5 by 52 military round is 160 grain round nose, rimless bottleneck. It's got a bullet diameter of 6.7 millimeter, overall length of just over 3 inches. And it's still loaded, and there's a SAMI spec. Max pressure is about 41,000, and it leaves the muzzle about 2,300 feet per second and about almost 1,900 foot-pounds of energy. So, guys, that's the detail, and it seems wholly apparent to me that not only whoever the shooter was, and for whatever his reason, making 3 shots in 6 seconds at a target 50 to 80 meters or yards away, not that challenging. So I'll throw it out first, Tom. By virtue of seniority, we'll let you address it.
Age? You mean age, right?
Yeah.
Thanks. Well, a couple of things to add to the list of facts. There is lots of fuzziness around some of the numbers, and that actually, I think, works to help support your theory that it's not that hard of a shot. For example, I think most people agree. Well, I shouldn't even say that with all the conspiracies, but many people agree that there were 3 shots in total, like you said. Mm-hmm. But I have seen time frames go as high as 9 seconds, like 7.9, 8 some seconds. So you start talking 2 to 3 per. That's actually a long time when you're on arrest. You're sighting through, a rifle, even working the bolt. Working the bolt is a split-second operation, even without thousands of rotations of practice, right? I mean, it's a lot more time than you think. It sounds aggressive. 6-7 seconds, no way, it can't be done. Well, it's longer than you think. So,
yeah.
The other thing that stands out to me is whether probably by sheer coincidence, a 4-power optic is kind of perfect for that scenario.
Exactly.
I mean, if I was trying to hit a target at 50 to 70 yards or 50 to 80 yards, boy, 4-power is really nice. You got a big wide field of view. You got enough precision to do it easily. You're never going to lose your target in the scope, right? So, I think it's entirely feasible for someone with reasonable skill with a rifle to do that.
Exactly. So, Eric, you're a retired law enforcement officer, lots of experiences, and you also did a tour of combat over in the sandbox. Your thoughts?
Before I went there, I wasn't sure, right? I'm like, it could go either way on the theories because I'd heard enough stuff slung around. I was down there for the National Defense Industry Association show. This would have been back in the OOs when I was working for AIM.
Oh, wait. So you're part of the conspiracy now. Okay. Sorry.
Okay. Yes, I'm part of the military industrial complex.
Yeah.
Well, no, not really now. And happened to go down there with 2 other guys I worked at Aim Point with, Freddie Blish, retired Marine Corps officer, and then there was another guy who was former Naval Special Warfare. And so we took the afternoon off and went down to Dealey Plaza. Once I stood in the window and I saw that the roadway didn't look to be the curved shape that I had thought it was from the original stuff, but I'm standing in the window looking at almost a straight line going away downhill shot. When you look at the distance, all under 100 yards, you look at the timelines, and that timeline doesn't count running the bolt 3 times. That timeline only counts running the bolt twice because gun's already loaded. Yeah. Bang, timer starts. So if you go 3 seconds to run the bolt, reacquire the sights, press the trigger, bang, 3 seconds, run the bolt, reacquire the sights, press the trigger. There's your 6 seconds, 3 shots.
Great point.
Right? And if you look at it that way, with an optic, fixed 4-power is probably going to be reasonable on eye relief. So you're not going to have to spend a bunch of time trying to get back into the eye box. Even if you come off out of the shoulder pocket and run it, it's still not going to be that difficult to get back into. One note I made that I wanted to bring up was, and we end up talking about this when we talk wound ballistics. People do weird things when they get hit by bullets. Bullets do weird things when they hit people. And I saw recently, unrelated to this, a drawing of what somebody proposed as the bullet path was. And it's like, yeah, I've seen rounds do really weird things, go in one place, come out somewhere else. That's not in a straight line. And so without seeing the actual autopsy, not having that in front of me, I'm not surprised that the rounds did something odd in terms of where they hit and where they exited.
Well, you touched on
quite a bit about that.
Yeah.
He spent a lot of time in the ER in his earlier medical days, and he has just a myriad of stories about just absolutely crazy behavior of of projectiles when somebody gets shot.
Exactly. And you guys both raised several points I wanted to touch on. Let's start with the magic bullet theory. Many of the conspiracy theorists say that, well, if that first round, and I guess the first round went through Kennedy's throat, and apparently they feel that was probably a survivable hit. And that one went, bouncing around the car. It hit Connolly in the chest and the wrist and all that stuff. What a lot of conspiracy people don't acknowledge is if Kennedy was seated directly behind Connolly, that path doesn't make any sense, but he wasn't. So, it's pretty much a straight line. And like you both said, bullets do really bizarro things, especially after they've entered flesh and probably hit some bone and then hit upholstery and, probably seat metal and all that. So I think the one bullet theory, it makes absolute complete sense. So, and far as go ahead.
I was just saying, if I remember the construction of that round, it's a jacketed ball round. It's over lead. It doesn't have a point to it. I mean, it's very much a ball shaped projectile. Yeah. Unlike what we think of now as being a ball round in a rifle. It's going to do odd things when it hits, especially if it encounters any bone or anything else like that.
Yeah. And let's get to the next point, the whole reaction to the bullet strike. And I'd seen the Zapruder film before, but before this, I really went frame by frame. And it's a really good example of what happens when military round hits head. It's pretty bad. But the big thing, again, conspiracy folks hang their hat on is Kennedy's head went back into the left. Well, my interpretation of it, and many more learned people than I have talked about this, but it looks more like Kennedy's head is flopping to the side. And when you consider it looks like the upper right quadrant of his head blew up, I think that's exactly what it would do. What I don't think was likely was another shooter on the grassy knoll, because I think everybody pretty much agrees the bullet strike was front to back in the upper quadrant. Be really hard to do that. Front. Exactly. Okay. And the grassy knoll would have been at a different angle, almost so, and I know conspiracy guys will say, but if this and if that, I'm just saying based on what I've seen as a policeman and dead bodies and what I know about shooting, I think the wounds are entirely consistent and Kennedy's reaction are entirely consistent with a shot from that window.
I wouldn't argue that point.
So, it's folks are looking to make more out of it. And like you said, Tom, there's a whole industry behind this, but I think it's really pretty straightforward after looking at it. So you were going to say, Tom?
Well, I was just going to say, I can't speak for the motivations, who else might have been involved. I mean, a million other factors. I'm just throwing out examples. All I see looking at that is from a firearms perspective, it's absolutely feasible.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, that would be my takeaway from the thing that, I would. So in other words, I'm disagreeing with the line of thought that says that's impossible to do from that position and those angles and those speeds and all that.
Yeah.
I don't think it's impossible at all. I think it's a moderate skill level,
Yeah. And, let's talk about the number of shots. There's not universal agreement that there was 3. Some heard 2. And again, from being at Dealey Plaza, it's kind of a U-shaped canyon, so to speak.
Yep.
So the direction Kennedy was traveling was toward an overpass with railroad, and there's nothing in the airspace beyond that, but the plaza is ringed by buildings. So as we all know, gunshots tend to reverberate and do weird things. And B, as both Eric and I can testify, witnesses are extremely and notorious unreliable. Not intentionally, it's just people process things differently. And based on that, if they tell you, I absolutely saw the sun come up in the east, you need to check that. So you guys' thoughts on this whole, there was 2 shots, there was 12 shots, there's 14 shooters and 3 more shooters. And
I don't have the insight on some of these additional claims, right? The number 3 sounds reasonable. Number 2 could be reasonable. On that, I don't know. I know from growing up, things I had seen on it earlier in life, it looked like that roadway was far more curved.
mm-hmm.
And once I'm in the window, I'm like, that roadway's not curved at all. So some of the things that I had even thought, once I stood there, I'm like, no, that doesn't look like the way it's
not at that point. I think it kind of curves off to the right a little bit further
after
down
the
the
bridge,
stretch.
like at the bridge.
Yeah. And I saw just the things I've looked at. A couple of the witnesses there's a couple of guys. There was, I think, a 15-year-old that sounded reasonably confident. And again, Brent, factoring in your witnesses are you're not expecting this stuff. So who's going to record it, in perfect HD in their mind, right? But there was a 15-year-old boy, I believe, who sounded more confident than some of the other people in what he heard. He reported 2. I think there was another guy that thought it was 2, but he couldn't be sure because the first one was muffled or strange or whatever. It caught him by surprise. But who knows?
And a number of folks who've taken a deep dive into the active killer events have talked about how gunfire doesn't sound like gunfire when you're off of the range, right? When it's on the range, we all know what it sounds like because we're used to hearing in that environment. But when you start getting into a more urban area, or some place like this is completely urban, the way the sounds bounce off and the way they're muted, it doesn't sound like what you expect it to sound like. A lot of folks have talked about, like, I didn't know what that sound was during events. So how much of that factored in as well?
Yeah. And I think the majority of the belief of the first miss shot is there was a person, and I don't remember age or sex, toward that railroad overpass that caught some shrapnel off something ricocheting off of a curb down there. So they think it was too high to be a shot coming out of maybe the third shot or whatever. Mm-hmm. But from my understanding, it's never been conclusively proven one way or the other that was the first shot. So let's do the deep dive into that now. Knowing how investigations go in the real world versus on television, there's the CSI effect, and we've confronted it numerous times. You'll show up at a minor burglary and they expect a full team with 3 vans and, everything to come out and do all that CSI stuff. And that's not how it works. And investigations don't work like they look on TV. And you're also talking 1963 when things were far less sophisticated. Even though Dallas PD was a big agency and pretty well thought of, still it's 1963. And the forensics, first of all, weren't anything comparable to today. But when you start talking about the confusion and the discrepancies between, witness statements, you get 50 people that saw something, you're going to get 51 different versions of it. And then what even the police officers write down is, I found this and I found that. Then you find another officer or agent that says, I found this and I found that. Well, that directly contradicts what the first one did. And Eric, you know that better than most folks.
Yeah. So put the numbers on it, right? 1963, that's 61 years ago. We didn't have touch DNA. We didn't have the ability to analyze some of the stuff that was out there the way that we do now, never mind how stuff was recovered, right?
Yeah.
So on the pure physical evidence processing, it's not going to get done like it was. You have a moving crime scene, the limousine, right? And everything else going along with it. And we also didn't have the video technology, the imagery technology to be able to go, okay, exactly where was that in time and space at the instant. Now we can take things down to thousands of seconds pretty easily and down to within a very narrow space and validate it. That wasn't there. And even if you go back and look at the video footage with the frame rates, you're not going to get that. So it doesn't surprise me that things might have changed over time and how stuff was perceived. But the evidence collection just wasn't going to be there, not by today's standards. Yeah. And unfortunately, not just victims expecting things to show up, but juries expecting things to be the way that they've been led to believe based on modern technology isn't going to be there.
Do you have a point, Tom? Or Tom?
I was just wondering where P. Diddy was. I mean, has anybody asked that question?
It's on the video in the hotel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, and Eric, you made a good point about a moving crime scene. They also had other crime scenes going on because, as we know, Lee Harvey Oswald ended up shooting a police officer.
Yes, he did.
And killing J.D. Tippett, who stopped to question him. And so now you've got what is, in any other circumstance, a major deal that mobilizes everybody. So now you've got all this stuff going on. And, the term I keep going back to is fog of war. It just, so many things, you look in hindsight and go, yeah, I should have done this, or I wish I would have done that. That's just the nature of the beast. That whole thing of, plans are great until first contact with the enemy. And it's the same with an investigation or anything like that. You can plan it all out, but when it actually happens, you're trying to adapt as things happen. And false information, they probably had 10 people down there saying, no, there were 7 shooters and they were over there. So now we got to go look at that. And, it's those things tend to be messy. Very, very messy.
Well, when no one's expecting it. I mean, that's a common, you guys know this better than me, but one of the more common factors across violent events and encounters is it takes the brain a while to process. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. What on earth is happening? Right?
Yeah.
And you can front load some stuff, and probably some of the cops might have, right? Or at least, we're going to see probably the uniformed first responders front loading stuff in their mind a little bit more, but the decent normal human beings who don't have to worry about that as they go through life, right? Whether it was that day or somewhere else, they're there to see the president drive by.
Right. And they're the witnesses, or many of them.
Yeah. Well, let's cover that whole thing of the various agencies and discrepancies between agencies. I will say straight up, and I'm sure Eric's been in the same boat too, when you start getting the bosses from various agencies, local, state, federal, county, and everything, constable and town marshals, it reminds you of a dog urination contest. Everybody's trying to pee on the tire to show, everybody's got a vested interest. And you would like to think the only vested interest is solving the crime. It doesn't work that way. And I sure bet it didn't work that way in 1963. So we're pretty good about putting the rivalries aside to solve the crime. But when it comes down to, do I share this? It makes my agency look bad or my people look bad. Sometimes it doesn't. So when you say the FBI didn't disclose everything they knew or what they did or didn't do, or the CIA, et cetera, that's entirely normal standard procedure in my book anyway.
Well, look at who has quote unquote direct interest in jurisdiction. You've got a police officer killed. You got the governor of Texas gravely or severely wounded. And then you've got the president killed. Right.
Yeah.
So just right there.
That's a lot of agencies.
Yeah. FBI and Secret Service on the federal level, right? Because DEA didn't exist. I don't think ATF was doing any of the things that they nowadays do, right? So they weren't going to be involved. With Texas, you've got Texas Department of Public Safety, but because it was the governor was injured, it was going to be the Texas Rangers, which is a separate entity within there because they do all the investigations. Then you're going to have to look at Dallas Police Department, right? Traffic, homicide, just at least those two, never mind everybody else.
Yeah. So you can imagine some of the conversations that were being held in various rooms and all that. And the other thing people don't realize, the importance of coordinating and communicating, especially back in that day, you couldn't communicate with everybody. It's barely happens now, but back then, none of those people could even talk to each other unless they were in physical proximity, which they weren't when all that happened.
Handheld radios were not on everybody's hip.
Yep.
Cell phones weren't even a consideration. I mean, we hadn't even gotten to Star Trek and the communicator yet, so cell phones definitely weren't involved. Well, but sometimes that's like the only way to explain it, right?
Yeah.
None of the things that we rely on now were available then. It was just straight up face-to-face or landline.
Yep. So to me, again, and I think we've keep emphasizing this, but it all makes sense. If it happened that way, I am completely comfortable with it. Yeah. If there were other factors involved, I guess I wouldn't be surprised, but I always go back to my baseline of any conspiracy is if it's big enough, somebody's going to talk after a while. So, I don't know. And I wanted to go to that angle, Tom, because that's your area of expertise. You've been on the ground, and if I know you have engaged these people at length, having some conversation. Talk about the conspiracy side of it, the conspiracy industry, and how certain people even have a financial interest, if not just a personal or moral interest, in finding the truth.
Sure. I mean, many of the things that came up when we were there, and it's been 15 years or so, or maybe more, I don't remember. But many of these theories are things that we've already touched on. There was the magic bullet scenario that went in impossible ways, and I think that's, you can look at that in a very rational way, as we spent some time discussing earlier. There's the number of shots that people reported, again, rationally explainable by the fog of war and unexpected violent incidents, right? The movement, from impact and, front versus back. I mean, all of these things are, at first glance, can imply conspiracy, but when you really, kind of dig into the level of detail, they are explainable. And again, I'm going to be very careful here because I don't know what happened. I don't know who was involved and who whispered in whose ear and what all happened leading up to that. No one does, right? But what I will say is the sequence of events is feasible.
Yes.
I think that's the thing, the conclusion that can be drawn. Are any of the conspiracies true? I have no idea. Maybe they are, but I know the most simple scenario, back to Occam's razor principle, right? It is absolutely feasible. And Eric, I think you brought up an excellent point that with the whole timer issue, the first shot was free in terms of time. It was 0 seconds. You had not unlimited, but as long as the car was in sight, time to line that up, and no clock started ticking until that happened. Right. Very important point, because that suddenly takes the timeline to 3 to 4 seconds instead of 2. Big difference.
And it's just something that kind of doesn't always get considered, right? People, if you tell people it happened in X amount of time, they think like the button started at some point preceding it. No, that time starts when that first shot breaks.
Yeah.
I'm glad you threw Occam's razor into it. And again, just to kind of reinforce what you said, I don't know who fired the shots from the window. I really believe it probably was Oswald, but I don't know for sure. But whoever fired the shots from the window had what was almost a straight line problem at relatively slow speed on a reasonable sized target, especially with an optic.
Well, put an everyday example on it. Clay targets. Mm-hmm. We're talking 30 to 50 miles an hour, depending on the sport, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's at least one place in the country that's been known to shoot flying clay targets with rifles.
Yeah.
That was some of the best
sitting here talking
would
about
be able to do that for sure.
Yeah. Sitting here talking about, the range. We were just at the NRA show talking about the new technology in turkey hunting. 65 yards. In my podcast with Ken Byers, Turkey Guide, a couple of weeks ago, he had seen one of his clients personally had taken a 65-yard shot with and a successful shot, dropped the turkey right there, 65 yards. That is farther with a 20 gauge shotgun than the first shot by whoever. So you're basically talking turkey or eastern deer hunting range there. So not that challenging. So one more thing before we go, and this fascinates me, and I shouldn't chuckle. There's no humor in any of this, but the whole thing with Jack Ruby shooting Lee Harvey in the basement of the Dallas Police Department. Again, I didn't know anything about it till I started studying it. Apparently, Jack Ruby, strip club owner, was very friendly with the vice cops in Dallas, and Dallas Vice Squad kind of ran that side of town, so to speak, and that was very common back then. And so I think that's entirely reasonable, too, that he called whoever he was closest to and said, hey, I want to see this guy. And I'm like, sure, come on in. Or maybe they didn't even have access control, because that's kind of, again, a newer concept that we need to sterilize the area and know everybody who's in there. It could have been anybody. I don't know what their procedures were, but I think it's very reasonable. Now, why would he shoot him? That's the only thing that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, other than just passion, the heat of the moment. But you guys got any thoughts on that?
If you look at the way Ruby was dressed from my recollection of the photos, he wouldn't have stood out.
Exactly.
He would have looked like a lot of the other investigators that were there. At least the folks local to Texas, resident to Texas, right? I don't know how common his face would or wouldn't have been in that crowd, because I hadn't heard the bit about Ruby's ties to a vice unit.
Yeah.
Till you brought it up. But it doesn't seem like he would have stood out. Nowadays, with people being more uniformed and some other things, that the way he was dressed might have pinged someone. But back then, no, it's almost normal for the environment.
I haven't examined that photo in extreme detail, but you guys have. Is there any chance that it could be either Taylor Swift or P. Diddy in costume?
It's entirely possible with AI. AI-generated photography, it could have been one of them.
Well, I got to say, what always makes me laugh when I think about it, if you've seen the famous meme photo that Lee Harvey's kind of bent over and looks like he's going ow or ooh, and everybody's kind of doing different things, and that photo won a Pulitzer Prize, I believe. But some wag years ago photoshopped in guitars and microphones, and it looks like they're just rocking out. And what a sick mind, and they did a great job. So that's what I kept thinking when I said there's no humor here, but yeah, that was a sick mind, but it was well executed. So anyway, so again, we're not talking whether there was a conspiracy or not. There could have been. In fact, maybe the Little Green Giant or somebody was involved, or P. Diddy or Taylor Swift, who knows? But I think we can all agree the shooting wasn't anything really that spectacular. Any contradicting thoughts?
Nope.
Feasible.
Exactly. Yes. So, well, a chance encounter. My 15-second tour of Dealey Plaza really put the hooks in me. So let us know what you think. Send us an email, editor@gunsmagazine.com, or if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment. And I'm sorry if we punctured your favorite conspiracy theory, because I read up to 80% of Americans believe there was a conspiracy. But I think if you look at the evidence, I fully admit there could be.
They're not mutually exclusive.
True. But Occam's razor, it generally works. So,
if not, who did it? Right, that could be argued.
Yeah,
but the way it was done, having been on the ground, looks very plausible.
Yeah, exactly.
So is that myth plausible? Is that kind of
yes?
Is that the official vote?
I don't look like Kerry Bryan. Sorry.
Wow. Okay. Not going
so you're
there.
A watcher.
Yeah.
I was.
Fan.
All right. Well, gentlemen, Erick Gelhaus, the editor of AmericanCop.com, and Tom McHale, the editor of American Handgunner. I appreciate you guys offering your expertise on something that people are still talking about 61 years later, and I'm sure probably will be for a long time. So thanks again. It's great talking to Tom McHale, the editor of American Handgunner, and Erick Gelhaus, the editor of AmericanCop.com. And to get those guys together in one forum is always a lot of fun. I don't know that maybe we've cut through the noise all that much, but at least you got to hear some opinions from veteran police officers and veteran shooters. So if you've got a comment or your conspiracy theory, leave us a comment down below, and we'd be interested in hearing what you've got to say. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. On behalf of everybody here at FMG, including American Handgunner Magazine, AmericanCop.com, and of course, Guns Magazine, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat, reminding you, now get out there and get shooting.